Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this very special session on Afghanistan and its impact on regional security. This has been one of the very important years in the evolution of the political trajectory of Afghanistan, and we have a great panel with us to discuss the implications of what has happened this last year, as well as some very important keynote speakers' introductory remarks. We have two sets of introductory remarks, one live and one recorded. Let me first invite the Special Envoy on Afghanistan Affairs of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Xiaoyong. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Harsh V. Pan, moderator of the panel. Ambassadors, colleagues, academicians. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Global Town Hall before I begin my presentation. FPCI of Indonesia for inviting me to speak here with such distinguished personalities in the profession and to discuss the future of Afghanistan and its impact on regional security. This is indeed a worldwide focused topic now. Indonesia is the most appropriate country to hold this timely discussion. As the biggest Muslim country in population, it has been very successful in its national modernization and economic and social development achievements with remarkable contribution for regional and global peace, security, and prosperity. Instructed by Beijing, my team and I traveled non-stop over recent 3 months to 15 countries around Afghanistan and far, and met with many people in charge from nearly 30 countries or international organizations, including Afghanistan itself, East, South, Central Asia, Middle East, Europe, UN Geneva headquarters, Russia, and the United States. Those trips have led to some message and views I found important and would like to share with you today. There are 6 of them. Number 1, international community do have consensus about the Afghan issue and agree with what China has been advocating. This issue, especially the situation after significant change of August 13, and efforts many countries have been making, it's not something about geopolitics, nor about big power wrestling. It is about humanity and humanitarian care, about whether and how Afghanistan as a sovereign nation can tide over current crucial transition from turbulence to order, overcoming challenges and grasping opportunity to have the fate of Afghanistan into Afghan people's own hands for national reconstruction and for joining efforts of building shared future for human community as a whole. Number 2, there is also a strong consensus that a historical lesson shall be drawn from the issue. The only right way for relationship between sovereign countries is to respect a country's own choice of their development path and respect different civilizations through mutual inclusiveness and mutual learning on an equal footing. Intervention into a nation's internal affairs and even imposing military means can only lead to conflicts, instability, poverty, and humanitarian disasters. That is why at meetings in 2 neighboring countries of Afghanistan foreign ministers meetings, or Moscow format gathering, or Doha dialogues, and so far so forth, participants all stress that some countries, especially some big power, after staying in Afghanistan over the past 20 years with massive troops, should as soon as possible redress its mistakes, defreezing liquidity, lifting unilateral sanctions and shoulder primary responsibility to prevent Afghanistan from humanitarian crisis, helping Afghan people to realize reconstruction. Number 3, it is an enhanced common standing that a fair and balanced view is needed regarding challenges and opportunities Afghan people are now facing. With the interim government set up, the country is making efforts to build political structure in running the country, restoring living and working order, opening external relations and cooperation. People there, as I have visited and see for myself, are trying to seize that opportunity to independently reconstruct Afghanistan. Challenges, meanwhile, are huge in at least four folds: political restructuring, economic reconstruction, countering terrorism, humanitarian suffering. With weak governance ability after 20 to 40 years destruction, livelihood hardship, and a complicated security situation, Afghan people need international assistance, constructive guidance, and support to fulfill their dream. I would like to emphasize that China has all along been a friendly neighboring country with Afghanistan. We have always respected its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, supported its people to decide by their own its nation's aspiration and development path, never intervened its domestic affairs, firmly carry out friendship policy with all Afghan people, and played, as our state councilor and foreign minister Wang Yi in many of his policy statements and his speech, in his attending of all those meetings, played a constructive role in political settlement of Afghan issue. China will certainly continue to do so in future. Number 4, it is China that has been advocating since earliest stage after August 15 change about what are expected for Afghanistan in transition. Those holdings have now all become international community's consensus, including to set up an open and inclusive political structure, to implement moderate and prudent internal and external policies with sound policy for women and education, to make a clear breakaway from terrorist groups with resolute strikes, to pursue friendly relations with all countries, especially good neighborliness, friendship, and cooperation. Number 5, enhancing multilateral, Number 5, enhancing multilateral coordination matters. China has been keen on participating in international coordination in multilateral and regional platforms, help to forge common ground and cooperation from all sides. We have worked with partners and succeeded in setting up Afghanistan neighboring countries' cooperation mechanism. This platform can offer neighboring countries unique role for Afghanistan striving for long-term and sustainable peace and security, and has won great international attention and a positive response. Based on what Afghan people need, China has announced renminbi 200 million worth of emergency humanitarian assistance. Delivery has been reaching Afghan people. It is strikingly encouraging that an Afghan pine nuts export air corridor is built up recently with 45 tons of first batch of goods sold out in China, benefiting thousands of working families, benefiting thousands of Afghanistan working families and women. We are also helping Afghans to combat COVID-19 by providing vaccines, medical supplies, and protective gears. China will try its best to continue supporting Afghan economic and social development and expand trade and business cooperation. Number 6, it is conducive to common interests of all in the region and the world at large to help Afghanistan to realize stability, prevent spillover of its security problems, and help it step onto good governance and political structure. China holds that all sides should support rational and pragmatic engagement and dialogue with Afghan interim government. Enhance mutual confidence, exercise positive guidance, and encourage Afghanistan to positively respond to international common concern. We need to increase mutual reinforcement and build synergy between various mechanisms on Afghanistan to assist the country for reconstruction, prevent refugee exodus and humanitarian nightmare. Regional and international community should strengthen counter-terrorism cooperation by supporting Afghan new interim government in its fighting of ISIL, ETIM, and all terrorist organizations. Forge a united front against terror and cast away double standards or selective cherry-picking approach to ensure that Afghanistan no longer becomes safe haven or concentrating places of terrorism groups. Ladies and gentlemen, China is ready to keep on working with all countries for an earlier realization of peace, stability, and development of Afghanistan. It is always well wished and expected that think tanks and scholars enhance research and exchanges. Ideas and wisdom you produce will certainly make most needed and valuable contribution for the solution of Afghanistan issue and for the well-being of Afghan people. Thank you very much. I hope I'm not
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for a very broad overview and very effective roadmap that you have presented. And I'll now invite, we have another special video message from Dr. Hassan Kazemi Ghomi, Iran's special representative for Afghanistan. Can we have that video, please?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to sincerely thank the authorities and the organizers of this forum, which is held to help to find a way out for the oppressed people of Afghanistan during the current crisis. For more than 4 decades, Afghanistan has been burning in the fire of war. During this long time, the oppressed Muslim and the resilient people of Afghanistan have not embraced the peace and happiness. It's been 43 years that the Afghan people experience massacre, destruction, displacement, looting of assets, brain drain, occupation, aggression, and intervention of some certain countries. They have seen weddings turn into mourning. Mosques and places of worship were the terrorist targets, which have been turned into dust. During the last 20 years, the U.S. occupiers, clinging to the flimsy pretexts of combating terrorism, promoted the propaganda of peace stability, security, and flourishing in Afghanistan using their beautiful weapons. Yet, what the noble and zealous people of Afghanistan experienced was nothing but the destruction of their homes, killing of their children and youth, the destruction of their property, and the loss of their meager assets, homelessness, and displacement. However, the occupiers had no choice but to flee in the face of the resistance of this nation, leaving ruins, and created the public hatred among the people. The oppressed nation taught a good lesson to the aggressors. The nation wins. Like the victory against the previous aggressors, the enemy was defeated, but the escape of the occupiers is not the end. The occupation has again targeted the people and the asset of this oppressed nation, and by targeting the mosques and massacres of the defenseless people, the aggressors are stepping on the footprints of the previous aggressors. All the aggressors are responsible for the crime, and they must be held accountable. Justice will come to them one day. The occupier is gone, but the evil of the occupier continues in another way. Therefore, everyone is responsible to help the people and the rulers of Afghanistan today to get rid of this critical situation. A new wave of displacement has begun with the onset of the cold season. Medication and medical equipment are in a tight spot. Unfortunately, we are witnessing the growth of terrorists, including ISIS, in Afghanistan every day. This situation increases everyone's duty. Terrorists today have no boundaries. Insecurity, instability, and the spread of terrorism in the region and the world causes a new wave of displacement to the neighboring and distant country. We should acknowledge that the stability and security of the region and international community depends on the stability and security of countries like Afghanistan. Although the rulers of Kabul today are responsible for the security of Afghan citizens and shall secure the border security of their neighbors, since terrorism is imported, everyone should help Afghanistan to solve this crisis. Furthermore, in the current situation, humanitarian aid should flow to Afghanistan from everywhere. Trade and economic activity with Afghanistan should flourish. Borders should be reopened, and humanitarian aid should enter Afghanistan to heal some part of people's problem. The Islamic Republic of Iran is proud to have hosted more than 3.5 million Afghan refugees over the past 43 years who have been treated like its own citizens and always stands with the oppressed people of Afghanistan in the most difficult conditions. Today, the 12th shipment of humanitarian aid has arrived in Kabul from Iran. But what I will mention in the end is the real way out of the current crisis in Afghanistan, the unity of these people, and the formation of an inclusive government, involvement of every single person in bringing to justice, encouraging partners to develop economic cooperation and participation in reconstruction and continuing the humanitarian aid are the most paramount factors. Afghanistan is a rich country, yet some certain countries did not allow Afghanistan to benefit from this richness. We have to help Afghanistan to be safe and away from intervention, occupation, and terrorism, as well to have a democratic government. In the end, I supplicate to Allah the Almighty for the success of this meeting and the success of everyone. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
مسئله دارم و سلام علیکم.
Thank you very much. And as we saw, we had we had two important interventions by two senior officials from Afghanistan's neighboring countries. And the vision that they presented was one where ordinary Afghans were at the heart of this discussion, which is very heartening to see given the challenges that ordinary Afghans continue to face every single day. To discuss the future of Afghanistan, regional security, and much more, we have today with us a great panel of experts. Very brief introductions. We have with us Mrs. Mariam Wardak, who has been at the forefront of Afghan women's struggles, co-founder of Her Afghanistan. We have with us Senior Colonel Zhou from the Center for, who's a senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategic Studies at Tsinghua University, who has also been with the Chinese Ministry for National Defense. We have with us His Excellency Amar Sinha, former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, and a distinguished fellow at RIS, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a think tank in New Delhi. And we have with us Dr. Lana Ravandi Fadai, who is a senior researcher at the Institute of Oriental Studies at Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. She's Russia's foremost scholar and thinker on Afghanistan. So welcome to you all. It's a great pleasure to be moderating this panel and to hear all of you and to be part of this discussion about Afghanistan and its future. Let me to begin with, as we have heard, that a lot of us, when we are looking at the political transition in Afghanistan, we are looking at what is happening to the ordinary Afghans and how ordinary Afghans have been feeling the brunt of conflict, war, instability over decades. So let me start with Mrs. Wardak first. Mrs. Wardak, as an Afghan, how do you see the US military withdrawal impacting your nation, your people, and which aspects are the hardest hit, and how do you see those challenges being overcome in the near future by ordinary Afghans? Over to you, Mrs. Wardak.
Thank you so much. I want to present a gentle reorientation of the war on terror. It seems that Afghans were deemed as disposable enough to be used, and it started with the Soviet war, leading to the Civil War because it was global in nature, and then what's been taking place until now. And the discussion around Afghanistan has been so focused on the democratization of Afghanistan, an attempt to normalize the war in a narrative of democracy. And I find it so insulting on many levels. We have to reset the timelines and re-examine what has taken place very carefully to articulate and craft our next moves regarding Afghanistan. I am absolutely disappointed in how the international actors have erased and minimized their role in what has taken place with Afghanistan. Oftentimes, I've mentioned in many panels that the withdrawal of forces will be the end to diplomatic relations in Afghanistan and ultimately an end to financial support. America's chaotic departure from Afghanistan demonstrates horribly inadequate foresight and planning that contributed to the refugee crisis, a long existing consequence of the nation's conflict, the major humanitarian crisis leading to starvation in certain cases. And then there's also the issue of foreign violent extremism. So we have fighters who had come to fight alongside with the Taliban, and then fighters who were there on their own agenda. Now that the Taliban are now fighting with the Afghan government or the coalition forces, it's uncertain whether foreign fighters will stay there or try to return home. And that ultimately affects diplomatic relationships. The financial crisis, foreign aid accounts to 75% of the economy. That includes providing finances to education, health sector, and security. And two of the three are in dire need of assistance. We have $9 billion in rainy day funds by the Federal Reserves that is frozen. There's so much uncertainty in Afghanistan after the American departure. And lastly, which is the most important, is the diplomatic crisis that Afghanistan faces, the disruption to the agreements that benefited the Afghan people on the ground through the former government. The US says it will remain intimately engaged in diplomacy in Afghanistan, on topics of counterterrorism, humanitarian aid, to women's rights, all without having a single diplomat posted there. And the UK has now begun its diplomatic journeys with the Taliban in Doha. While the uncomfortable reality is that diplomacy with the Taliban will be inevitable for regional players for the purpose of trade, humanitarian security, evacuations, and other topics. Now, the question is how and what will diplomatic engagement look like? My concern as an individual, as an Afghan, and with others who have been engaging with on the ground, is the distrust that's taken place with the Afghan people and international allies. They're not considered allies anymore. They're considered accounts of misusing the Afghan people, which is why I mentioned how Afghans are disposable to all. I don't want to go any further unless there's a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mariam. I think we'll come back to another round, and I'm sure there'll be questions from the participants as well. But I wanted to go to the regional calculus that you so articulately mentioned, that regional calculus and global calculus, how the global actors are reacting to it. And of course, China is such an important country in the region today. So can I come to Colonel Zhou? Sir, when you look at China and you look at its priorities, how do you look at the void that has been left by American withdrawal, and what is your assessment of how it impacts regional security environment?
Thank you, Professor Panda. It's interesting you mentioned the word void. If we look at Afghanistan 20 years ago, it's an independent country. We can safely argue that there is no void. But with the sudden departure of the American troops and associated collapse of the Afghan economy and instability, of course, there is a void. Currently, the situation there is so bad. If you think of drought, the harsh winter, and the badly needed foreign aid, and billions of dollars that are still being frozen. So currently, there are about $90 billion that are still frozen by the United States. I'm sorry to hear in the recent interview by CNN's Fareed Zakaria with American's National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan, that the U.S. government would only provide humanitarian aid. So far, it hasn't a plan to freeze the foreign currency of Afghanistan. But I say sorry, because this is Afghan's asset. I think the whole attitude of the international community towards the Taliban is more or less the same. That means it has to be open and inclusive, just as Ambassador Yue mentioned just now, and Taliban should know that. I think we should give Taliban a chance for them to make a change, and I believe they know time has changed. After 2 decades, they should have learned something new. The Afghan's peace and stability, of course, have a direct impact upon the peace and stability in the west of China. That is why we are concerned with the ETIM, a UN-recognized terrorist group which operated from soil of Afghanistan against China. China doesn't have any particular wishes for Afghanistan that are different from the rest of the international community. But I think there are 2 things that China are particularly important to Afghan people. One is political instability. The other is economic opportunities. On the first one, China is traditional friendly country with Afghanistan as an immediate neighbor. Well, neighbors do not always are friendly, but China is always friendly toward Afghanistan. There are many foreign invaders coming to Afghanistan from afar, but never from China. Afghan people have good memories of China and vice versa. So we are today in a better position to help Afghanistan. The war is over. China's capabilities in industry building and infrastructure building are next to none. These 2 capabilities are particularly needed to in a war-torn country whose infrastructure is poor and industry is next to zero. Let me remind you, we're not talking about whether China should enter or not, because China is already the 3rd largest trading partner of Afghanistan, even during wartime. Having said that, China alone cannot save Afghanistan. Of course, only Afghan people can decide their own future, but China wished to join the international community in helping Afghanistan. I hope Shanghai Cooperation Organization can play a bigger role in helping Afghanistan too. Just now, Ambassador Yue mentioned about the neighboring country of Afghanistan. Well, all the neighboring countries of Afghanistan are Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries. And Afghan lies in the heart of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So if Afghanistan is not stable, then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will have a problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with this brings me to the other regional power, other regional country, and very important neighbor of Afghanistan, India. His Excellency Amar Sinha is here with us. Sir, when you look at it from New Delhi's perspective, how great do you think is the impact of American withdrawal, not simply on Afghanistan, but also in the wider regional security calculus?
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers for getting me to this forum. You see, let me start by saying that, of course, the impact has been absolutely huge. But I also am a firm believer that the Americans had to leave, and the Soviets had to leave Afghanistan. They had to leave someday. One could discuss the modality of their leaving, etc. But the first thing it has done, it has made this issue a regional issue, where the neighbors have to come up and do much more. Now, that has created a dilemma for all the neighbors that I see, that they have got what they perhaps wished for, that the Americans should leave, but they don't know what to do with it now going forward. And we heard that they still expect that the West should come forward and fulfill its obligations towards Afghanistan. Second thing is that it has, of course, it is going to impact everywhere. It's going to impact the geopolitical, the economic, the humanitarian assistance, the democratic experiment as it looks today, and plus the nature of the Afghan nation and state itself, because that flows from the nature of the government that has come there on 15th of August. This is also the second time that really a radical Islamist group has taken power into Afghan, which I'm a bit surprised that the rest of the world seems to believe that this is the normal template for Afghanistan to be. The history shows it otherwise. That Afghans, while perhaps it does not adopt to or mold itself to purely democratic, Western democratic model, but it has its own participatory model, which is not necessarily what is being represented today or what is being implemented today on the ground. So I see that this is the new changes are affecting even the old traditional social mores of Afghanistan, and that's why I fear that there will be huge resistance. The other thing I believe is that expatriates cannot run any country. Now, expats, whether they come from the West or they come from across the Durand line, which you see the current government composed of, will not be able to run, and we see that there will be a prolonged problem. The issue here is that the humanitarian assistance, because the economy has collapsed, the aid has stopped, their funds are blocked, I think people are facing a real challenge of existence. And that is what I think India's focus is. We are trying to see that how aid and assistance could be provided to Afghanistan directly, unimpeded, etc. Our concern also rises from the nature of the regime. Now, is this the Taliban regime that we expected, or which was Taliban 1, or is this a Haqqani-controlled government where half the cabinet is on the UN security list? Like some speaker said that Etin is on the UN list, so are these gentlemen. Now, so obviously the new developments will also challenge the global structure or rules for dealing with terror groups and terrorists, and that is a big challenge that we will face. So I will stop here and answer more questions later, but we feel that this is a major challenge, and it has changed in many ways the Afghanistan that we knew for the last 20 or 30 years. Of course, India has known Afghanistan as a proud nation state for a very long time. It was our immediate neighbor. But that I feel very strongly that its people have really been left at the mercy of an ideology which is not really Afghan.
Thank you. Thank you. And this takes us to the to Dr. Ravandi Fadai for her perspective from Russia as to how she views the landscape, how she looks at what has happened in the region from Moscow's perspective, and of course the regional security environment. How does she look at the evolution of the regional security challenges just in the matter of the last few months that have changed so dramatically, Dr. Fadai?
Yeah, thank you. Russia's neutral status, having not participated in the 20-year war, gives it advantage as a negotiator. But Russia has to take into account the interest of the countries around it. In Central Asia, Russia is performing something of a balancing act because the interests of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan are different. Tajikistan supports Ahmad Massoud, the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was a legendary fighter against the Taliban, killed in terrorist attack in 2001. Ahmad Massoud is very unlikely to accept any peace with the Taliban. Uzbekistan, on the other hand, is more agreeable towards the Taliban and accepting of the new Taliban government. But Uzbekistan cannot do much to help the Taliban government, just as it seems Tajikistan cannot stop it. The Taliban needs to negotiate with outside powers because it has no money. The United States has ended all financial support to the country, and international institutions have frozen the Taliban assets. This is where Russia comes in. Clearly, Russia considers the reality of the situation to require talks with all sides, regardless of ideological disagreements. Russian representatives have repeatedly emphasized the urgency of normalizing the situation, of not allowing it to spin out of control again. A Taliban without money is disarmed in a way, but in another way, even more dangerous. Fighters might switch over to ISIS, for instance. Civil war could easily begin. While Russia has officially declared the Taliban a banned terrorist organization, it is holding talks with them. The UN has temporarily cleared certain Taliban representatives of their terrorist status so that they can legally travel to Moscow for negotiations. This is a critical time and will require diplomatic finesse from major foreign players on the outside and some compromise from the Taliban on the inside. Some degree of power sharing and representation for the conflict groups, including ethnic groups in the country, protections and respect for the rights of women. One of the real threats to stability is that some elements inside and outside of Afghanistan may want war. Outside parties may want to turn Afghanistan into a firing range again, a good place for testing new weaponry and winning political points at home. Many American media sources, especially conservative media, are criticizing the US withdrawal and emphasizing the chaotic situation in Afghanistan. They are forces that would like to see American Western military re-engage in Afghanistan, regardless whether or not there is a need for that. So Russia is trying to mediate to get the different sides to compromise and avoid provocation, which obviously is not an easy task. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ravani Fadai, for this exposition. Let me now turn to Mrs. Wadak, because in your first intervention, you talked about the domestic challenges, and in some ways, increasingly, as we heard other speakers, we saw how the domestic and regional and international are connected together. So I was wondering if you can explore a bit on the theme of Taliban's government's foreign policy worldview. Do they have a worldview? Is there a worldview that you can ascertain? And if there is a worldview, then how those decisions are being made or will be made, particularly in the context where the government will have to come to terms with a humanitarian disaster unfolding domestically and therefore engage with regional and global interlocutors?
Well, the Taliban is not as cohesive of a force as it appeared to be during the war. The principal split is between the more moderate Doha-based external leadership of the Taliban that negotiated with the Americans on the withdrawal, and then the hardline commanders in Afghanistan and their ideological allies. The membership of the interim government denotes that the hardliners have won out over the Doha group. And the Doha leader of the Doha fraction leader, Mullah Abdul Ghani Bradar, who was the chief negotiator with the US and tipped to be the head of the government, has been relegated to the number 2 position. And the government includes Sirajuddin Haqqani, which is the number 1, the most wanted UN terrorist listed individual. Now, the continued presence of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and the border with Pakistan and the emergence of Islamic State poses a major problem for Taliban's foreign relations. If this becomes a hardline Taliban government, it's likely to alienate not just Western powers, but also neighbors such as China, Russia, and Iran that have major strategic economic stakes in Afghanistan. Now, China seems to be eyeing Afghanistan as an economic prize in the context of its Belt and Road Initiative, especially because of the country's vast and largely unexploited mineral reserves. However, the Taliban might be committed to aiding Muslims in distress, and Beijing could be a grave security threat because of its own genocidal policies towards the Muslims in Xinjiang. Now, given the internal tensions within the Taliban and the multiple demands and its meager policy-making resources, one wonders if it will be able to manage this in an intricate balancing act. If it fails, it could drag the entire region into a series of major conflicts. The Taliban leadership structure has been a long mystery, with little known about how it works beyond the group's most influential figures. It holds 20 members in the leadership, which usually advises on the foreign policy and security policy moving forward, but most importantly, the leadership in the Quetta Shura who directs them. But there is no clear indication. The one thing that I think the international community can use to their advantage, one can say a carrot on a stick, is the dire need of economic support at the moment.
Thank you. Can I now take the question to Mr. Sinha, sir? The issue of Taliban and how India has engaged in the past and will engage the grouping in the past has been a big part of this equation that the regional situation has been confronting. In your assessment, how do you foresee India-Taliban engagement emerging in the near term? Because clearly, for various reasons, Taliban is there. Taliban is in Afghanistan. So, what are the terms and conditions that will shape India's engagement with the government there at the moment?
Yes, I think India, along with the rest of the world, faces the same dilemma that they say that I have gun on the heads of 40 billion people, so you better help us, otherwise these people will suffer. Now that creates a moral dilemma for everybody. I think that Afghan or people-centric policies would guide India. We would engage with those elements of Taliban who are willing to engage with India without necessarily giving a diplomatic recognition or greater acceptance globally. And basically focus on the key words that we said, that we want really an Afghan which is sovereign, which is independent, and which is united. Now, our policy should be guided by these 3 key principles, and that includes using whatever influence and leverages we have on Kabul leadership to make it more inclusive, to make it more Afghan. and perhaps a moderated position if that is possible at all. But as I said, it does pose a challenge because, you know, our strengths where people to people connect, the open markets, how much we can sustain that given the sort of lack of trust between the two sides and the new threat perceptions that are emerging of drugs, of terrorists getting pushed into India. So that will remain a challenge. So, but I hope that we follow our policies wisely, engage with Taliban, but not necessarily jettison the moderate and what I call the good Afghanistan. That is a constituency that we have supported for 20 years, and we should need to support like everybody else. It has to be a dual track policy.
Thank you very much. Due to time constraints, we are moving to question and answers from the public, and we are getting lots of questions here. Let me go to Colonel Zhou for the first question by Lambert from Netherlands. And he's asking that China has been the first country to engage the Taliban. In doing so, what did it wish to accomplish? And do you foresee any complications, security or diplomatic, as a result of this engagement with the Taliban? Again, an extension of the question that I think Ambassador Sinha was addressing in the context of India.
Thank you, Professor Pant, and thank you for the question from the Netherlands. Well, first of all, I don't think China is the first one to engage the Taliban, at least not before Pakistan, right? So China's policy, as I mentioned before, is not very much different from the rest of the world. We, like anybody in the rest of the world, wish Taliban to become open and inclusive. The question is, we must give them some time. So I understand there is a difference in attitude, at least at the UN Security Council, between Russia and China on one side, and the other three countries on the other side. So sometimes I wonder if the P5 countries could not reach an agreement. Definitely, they cannot lift the sanctions that is badly needed for Afghanistan. And sometimes I wonder what really is a problem. So because Americans and the NATO allies have suffered in Afghanistan, so probably now they are a bit happy to see Taliban suffer because they still consider them a terrorist group, because one of the so-called terrorists is still in the cabinet. So unless and until they change the attitude, so we won't see sanctions being lifted. So could the P5 countries come into agreement? For example, if there are certain conditions for Taliban, because as I said, there isn't much difference between China's attitude with the rest of the world. So the P5 countries can lay down the conditions to say what the Taliban must do in accordance with the rules we have laid. So probably Taliban would like to make a change, to let a woman to come into cabinet. That's not a big issue. To have let girls go to school, of course, why not? So the real problem is the real attitude of the Western countries. To finish my sentence, I wish we give Taliban a chance to let them change in accordance with the wishes of the people. Thank you.
We have another question for the next question for Dr. Ravandi Fadai. There's Stephen from Russia who's asking you in terms of how can Russia maintain its relations with China as well as the international community while engaging with Taliban. So what is how can Russia attain the delicate balancing act that I think a number of other countries are also struggling with, as we heard in several interventions today?
Russia's involvement will depend on how the situation develops inside of Afghanistan. Russia has two main security concerns there. The first, the danger of radical Islam spreading into Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. It must be remembered that huge numbers of migrants from Central Asia work in the Russian Federation. Russia has a vast border area that is not easy to monitor and control. The second concern is narcotic traffic. Tens of thousands of Russians die annually in what has been an ongoing heroin epidemic. Close to 100% of heroin and raw opium comes from Afghanistan. But we must remember that Russia, in the form of the Soviet Union, fought a brutal war in Afghanistan for a decade. It was expensive, bloody, damaging to both sides, much like the US-Afghan war. Russia has no interest in repeating such an exercise. On the other hand, one of the problems Russia has that the US, for instance, does not is that Afghanistan is very close geographically. There are no oceans between us, so problem in Afghanistan can quickly become problems for Russia. Ones that Russia cannot afford to ignore. Of course, a stable Afghanistan will be the best situation for Russia, and with this goal in mind, 40 tons of humanitarian aid were recently sent by Russia to Afghanistan: sugar, flour, and other essentials. Unfortunately, that is not nearly enough, and Russia does not have a large budget for Afghan aid. What's more, as we all know, aid must be accompanied by controls, which means more money, manpower, and know-how. It has been widely reported how humanitarian supplies are often seized and sold to the people who were supposed to receive them for free, often resold many times, or used for local political goals. But again, much depends on the Taliban and on the Afghan people who are facing serious challenges. A very negative but possible scenario will be that the Taliban are unable to form a stable and inclusive government, which could mean that Russia is forced to take a more active peacekeeping role. But again, it's very difficult for me to imagine a situation in which Russia would again become involved militarily in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. Let me now take the question from Abigail from Indonesia to Ambassador Sinha. Ambassador Sinha, she's, I think, interested in getting an assessment of the recent security dialogue that happened in Delhi. And in that context, how India is looking at working with other regional partners to deliver a productive contribution to the lives of ordinary Afghans.
Thank you very much. Yes, this was actually a third of the series. This was the first regional security dialogue which happened after August 15 when Taliban has taken over. The other two, 18 and 19, were held in Iran. And they were really looking at the evolving situation, how they should react to the Doha agreement, the US, etc. But this one really looked at the change situation in Afghanistan. And I think the general consensus, there was a document which was issued, but the sense that one got from the meeting was there is still a huge amount of distrust of what the Taliban says. There seems to be a feeling that it is very difficult that Taliban would be able to deliver on anything. They are more likely to fail under the weight of expectations, both domestic in terms of governance and services that they can provide, and international in terms of the commitments that people are seeking. First, of cutting links with different terror groups, because that's not the way it is. You know, for our analysis, we put them in different boxes, but at one level, in terms of the ideology, the people, the objectives, they all operate sort of interchangeably. So it is very, very difficult. And I think that Taliban has made it very clear. However, there was also a consensus that we should do everything possible to help and provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. And I think one new element that has been brought in, that the element that there is a threat from fanaticism, radicalization, and separatism emanating from Afghanistan, that was a new element that was added in. So I think that this dialogue will continue, and it will need to be continued for some time to build a consensus around Afghanistan, because eventually, as I said, this is a regional issue, and the regional countries will have to step up their act.
Thank you. Mariam, the next question is for you from Brian from Indonesia. And he's actually touching upon an issue that you really care about and we all care about. Taliban has promised that they are going to consider giving women right to education and work. I think the question is, how optimistic are you that that's going to happen? And how much faith do we place on such commitments or on such promises?
I think the one thing that the Taliban have been consistent on is their messaging from 1996 until now. Any of us who might be optimistic towards a more liberal life for Afghan women is incorrect. This is where international pressures could be used. There have been some liberal movement in regards to early education for Afghan girls, or high school education have now opened up in about 5 provinces. But I think that has a lot to do with how elders are engaging with the Taliban commanders in those provinces. Everything is a case-by-case situation. We can't be so positive in regards to how the future for Afghan women will be. What is concerning is the fact that the Taliban have reacted very negatively to the protests. The Taliban have reacted very negatively to the demands that women have made. And my question here is, was that the best approach in this topic? So per se, well, let me give you one example. We have delegations from the United Kingdom in the US indirectly talking to the Taliban on women's issues, but there are no women present in that room. The only women that we have seen actively talk to the Taliban is Deborah Leon, who is the UN ambassador. But other than that, women are missing from the scene. So we have to be extremely active, and we have to be realistic. And I'm not going to provide false hope in the sense that I think the Taliban have changed. No, the one thing I do give them credit for is consistency, and the fact that I think they're going to be very strict on how women are active in the society.
Thank you. The next question is for Colonel Zhou. This is from Dr. Wasim, Pakistan. And he's asking about the upsurge of ISIS-K, Khorasan, which we have recently seen wreaking havoc in all parts of Afghanistan, further deteriorating an already tight security environment in the country and in the region. So I think the question is, what can the international community do to come together to defeat the terrorism that is now growing and the challenges that are now growing with this emergence of ISIS, Khorasan, and other new kinds of actors in Afghanistan?
Thank you, Professor, for this good question. Well, this is a big issue. Basically, this could be a good question for Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is exactly why Shanghai Cooperation Organization was founded many years ago to eradicate the so-called 3 evils. So ISIS-K, of course, is a demonstration that there is more than one terrorist groups in Afghanistan, and with even the intermarriage, between these terrorist groups is so difficult, even for outsiders to distinguish who is who. But having said all that, I think, comparatively speaking, Afghanistan is now more peaceful, right? Now warring times. So as a whole picture, so the situation now has actually stabilized a bit. Let's think in another way. Which political force can actually now overthrow Taliban to become the ruling power? If no other political forces can do that, and if Taliban promise to fight against other terrorist groups, we should give them a chance. Let me come back to what I said just now. If the five permanent members of UN Security Councils laid conditions for Taliban to comply, won't they apply? For example, letting girls to go to school, letting one or two women to enter in the cabinet in exchange just for the $90 billion I mentioned, won't they agree? So that is not a big issue. These women issue, this human rights issue, they are issues, but they could be resolved, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come to Dr. Rawandi Fadai for a question from Anissa from Indonesia? She's asking, that there seems to be this assessment that Russia and China and Iran are trying to make geostrategic gains vis-a-vis the US in Afghanistan and in the adjoining region. Can the US still work with them? Is there a possibility of both US working with countries like Russia, China, and Iran on Afghanistan and regional security? What kind of possibilities do you foresee?
But of course, all negotiations which we have in Moscow, we have with permission of United States and United Nations. And recently we had one meeting with many countries, and India, Pakistan, and other countries participated at these negotiations, but the United States, they refused to come, but they agreed that these negotiations, we need to these negotiations.
Can I add 2 words?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because this is relating to China. What I want to say is China has always voiced its readiness to cooperate with the United States on Afghan issues. There are at least 2 occasions where Afghan issues was mentioned at a diplomatic level. First, during Deputy Secretary of State Sherman's visit to China, in which she mentioned counter-narcotics as one area of cooperation. This is exactly what the Russian scholar has mentioned. I think it is possible, but the question is, if Taliban has no other resources other than from drug, which provides about 80% of the international world drug in the world, then there is no other way out for Taliban. Taliban would still have to resort to this bad tradition of growing opiates. Then the other thing is Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and UN Secretary of State Blinken talking about soft landing, talking about making joint efforts toward soft landing of Afghanistan. So what does that mean, soft landing? I'm thinking about it myself. I think it means about calming down the situation. But the point is, unless and until we provide blood transfusion to Afghanistan, which heavily depends upon international assistance, then this country can hardly survive. Then how could we calm down the situation? So these are the issues there. Still, we need to give them a chance. This is what I mean. I don't mean there is good Taliban or bad Taliban, but we need to give them a chance to see whether they can really honor their own words.
Ambassador Sinha, if I can come to you with a question. This is George from Uganda, who is asking whether the international community and the neighboring countries are doing enough to put pressure on the Taliban government to observe human rights, as a means for achieving peace and security. So basically, the question is whether enough is being done about the human rights question by the neighboring countries, or is it something of a sideshow at the moment?
Well, this is my personal opinion. I feel that not enough is being done. It was not being done even before, because I think the entire focus is how to mainstream Taliban, how to whitewash it, how to present it as the future government of Afghanistan. So I think human rights have taken a backstage. And the problem, of course, is not going to end, because, human rights violations will continue, because there are groups which are opposed to Taliban. Taliban itself has disgruntled elements which are using violence, because violence has become the currency of settling political scores. And in this sort of a scenario, I think human rights always take a backstage. So it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. I don't think international community has too much leverage also today on Taliban, and Taliban senses it, that it is in a position of strength. So it can get away with murder, literally.
Thank you. Can I come to Mariam now? Mariam, you have talked of essentially the conversation has been about a lot of the conversation has been about the plight of ordinary Afghans, and you have passionately spoken about. Oh, sorry, I think Mariam has logged out for some reason. So I'll go back to Colonel Bo then. Colonel, there's a question from Albert from the US, who is asking, in a political sense, how likely would the Taliban, in your assessment, how likely is it that the Taliban is in a position to fulfill all the international demands, like political inclusivity, etc., given that they come from a different belief system, and given that they have a different political and ideological trajectory over the last few decades? So how optimistic we should be, and how likely in your assessment that might happen?
Very brief and straightforward answer is we have to wait and see. But at least we have seen changes. That means the Taliban almost have said all the things that the international community is happy to hear. So they also talk about the same thing: inclusiveness, openness, right? So I assume they should have learned something from 1990s until now. So, and as you see, the population has changed. Afghanistan itself has changed. When I went there in early 2000, I saw a totally devastated country. I have never been there since, but I think things should have changed a lot. So that is why I'm talking about giving them a chance to see whether they could honor the words and implement them with deed in line with the hope of the international community.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to moderate this conversation. We heard from multiple vantage points the challenges that are emerging in Afghanistan. They have emerged already in some fundamental ways, and how regional countries are looking at the challenges and how they are reorienting their own strategic profile. What is interesting and what remains interesting is how ordinary Afghans are the worst sufferers amongst all the chaos, conflict, and the turbulence that we are witnessing. So as the international community, as the regional actors try to move from some disorder to some kind of an orderly transition in Afghanistan, the challenges are there. But I think so are also an opportunity for regional powers to step up and to make a case to the world that they can provide some stability to Afghanistan and its people. So thank you all very much. And thank you to Global Town Hall for this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.